By a show of hands, does anyone here actually care what game journalists have to say? Yeah, that's what I thought. Absolutely nobody. And by another show of hands, who has ever cared what they had to say? Very few of us. There was once a time when I was just a youngster, playing Xbox 360, mooching off my stepdad and taking his Game Informer. Those were the last time game journalism actually meant anything at all. Nowadays, it's just so blatantly obvious that these big corporations are paid out the ass by AAA developers to rate their games big. Mixtape being one blatant example, where a wannabe indie company puts out a game no one asked for and no one really wants to play. If you could call it a game at that, shit's basically just a movie. There really was a time where these game journalists and game reviewers were actually honest, but that's just not the time we live in today. Today, we live in the time games like Arc Raiders on release are getting absolutely flamed by IGN. This is the same IGN that gives Crimson Desert a bad review as well. And if they're not paid off, they're just hiring inexperienced people trying to make a quick buck off of us. Literally taking advantage of the same fan base that they're trying to encapsulate and sell their narrative. I'm sorry, but I miss the days where games could just be games. I don't care about the amount of black guys to white guys ratio, or the amount of straight people to non-binary or bisexual or gay people or lesbian people in my games. All I care about is that the game is good and that it keeps me hooked through the entire time of playing it. And in my multiplayer games, man, I miss the days where you could just see the craziest shit on someone's emblem and no one was there to cry about it and point fingers. So I'm going to be showing a couple of articles from game journalists. Some of these will be older and some of these will be newer articles, and the reason why I'm going to be showing them is to help back up the things that I'm saying in this video, so I'm not just rambling on with opinion. So in 2024, GameSpot said, despite the increasing numbers of LGBTQ gamers, only 2% of games include LGBTQ characters. And quote, it is time to move past the idea that LGBTQ inclusive games are a separate niche category. All games should strive to reflect the people who play them. And to quickly summarize what GameSpot is saying in this article, they're basically claiming that developers should include more LGBTQ-centric characters, including trans people, gay people, lesbian people, and anything under the umbrella of LGBTQ in their games to be more inclusive. While I think being inclusive in some things is fine and even healthy, I do not believe it belongs in our games. Because once we start being inclusive, we stop creating games that appeal to people. Instead, games will just turn into the equivalent of elevator music. Once we start making games that appeals to every subset of people, we stop making games that are memorable for a select few groups of people. Are you telling me you want shoehorned characters in your games that they're just there to appeal to LGBTQ in that community of people? Well, I don't have a problem with that group of people. I have a problem with anyone trying to infect video games with political views and gender norms, and I just enjoy games where I can relate with the characters. I enjoy games where the story takes over my thoughts and I daydream about them. And an example of a character in a game that I believe fits under the umbrella of LGBTQ that wasn't done in a negative way would be Ellie from The Last of Us. See, that character I grew to really, really love. She's a niche case character, a game that tells a well-earned story. But I think the moment we start forcing developers to make things including something they do not understand, it starts to become blatantly obvious that it's forced. And that's not the world I want to live in. It's already infected TV shows, it's infected music, and I do not need this infecting games. Games are my safe haven, away from the real world. Alright, the next one that pisses me off comes from Wired. And Wired says, when it comes to trans and non-binary representation, the games industry is in a state of flux. Change is happening, especially in the indie scene, but it's a long process that's creating a landscape of unpredictability. New releases that have the opportunity to challenge the status quo often fall short, as seen in the initial feedback about Cyberpunk 2077. Fans were divided on whether the inclusion of a trans character outweighed the subtle transphobia at play in the game. If I'm going to be really honest with you, I played Cyberpunk 2077, and I didn't notice whether there was a trans character or not. The people who do notice are the ones that are looking to create problems around games, the ones that are seeking out the controversy. Let's keep it going. They also said even other so-called best efforts like Dragon Age Inquisition and The Last of Us 2 rely on fetishism and trauma. it becomes a tired tapestry of cliches and misunderstandings, helped along by a lack of LGBTQIA+ conversations. If developers took the time to talk with the diverse mix of LGBTQ+ gamers, they'd understand, better appreciate the nuance needed to create well-rounded queer characters. Instead, trauma mining, specifically trans trauma, is often a point of focus, an issue that could be eradicated if more trans input was brought to the table. Dear Lord, is this buzzword, keyword slop to read. It sounds like ChatGPT wrote it to use all the keywords it possibly could when writing this entire paragraph. I'm going to try to add something actually worth listening to, but I want to touch on a few points. One of the problems they mention is that developers should take into account what LGBTQ communities have to say about their characters in order to form better, well-rounded characters. I don't think game developers would be so opposed to doing that if instead the community stopped complaining about the games that are put out and instead wanted to provide something constructive. What we constantly see is the outrage and the backlash from this community. Nothing constructive is coming out of it towards the gaming industry in hopes of creating better characters. I also think they could have picked a better example. While I haven't played Dragon Age before, I don't think The Last of Us is a good example. I think for the most part, other than this one article that I've read, most journalists actually praise them for their take on lesbian characters and LGBTQ characters. So Last of Us is kind of a bad take, unless we're talking about season 2 of the show, but I'm assuming we're not, because we're talking about video games here, right? But it's almost like these journalists haven't played the games. They're forgetting about the fact that these characters are going through really traumatic experiences. And using words like trauma mining just tells me that they don't really understand the material that they're talking about. Ellie lost Joel in the apocalypse and is trying to deal with love in a world that is no longer what it once was, where people are constantly at each other's backs, and you never know when death is right around the corner. It is not the average, everyday coffee shop relationship. Alright. That's going to do it for today's video. I've completely ran out of gameplay content, and I'll make sure to record more for next time. Please let me know what you guys thought in the comments, and give me a like. It really helps me out in the algorithm. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.